Welcome to the Faith and Feelings podcast. My name is Taylor Joy, and I'm passionate about helping you untangle and honor your emotions, authentically practice your faith, and integrate both into your everyday life so that you can experience the goodness and delight that comes from living in relationship with yourself, God, and others. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. If you know me, you know that I'm a reader, and earlier this year, I read a book that became one of my top 10 favorites for 2025, and it's called Restore My Soul: Reimagining Self-Care for a Sustainable Life by licensed therapist Janice McWilliams. What I loved most was how Janice talked about self-care in such a grounded and practical way. She unpacks a lot of our misconceptions about what self-care really is and why so many of us still end up feeling exhausted and stretched thin, even when we're trying to practice self-care. My biggest takeaway was this: maybe self-care isn't necessarily about stepping away from our lives, but learning to show up to our lives with more awareness and kindness. As Janice writes, learning to care for our inner worlds, our thoughts, emotions, and inward experiences in an ongoing way is the life-sustaining self-care we need. I reached out to Janice and was so excited when she said yes to coming on the podcast. In this conversation, we dive into some of my favorite concepts from her book, and she shares some really practical tools for how to actually live this out. We did run into a few sound issues, so you might notice that here and there, but it's still such a rich conversation. Listen in. Well, Janice, I'm so glad to have you on Faith and Feelings today.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. And I just love the title of your podcast.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. Well, to get started today, I'm curious to hear a little bit about your story. I know you're a therapist and a spiritual director. So what drew you into this work, and how did writing become a part of that story?
I started out in campus ministry with InterVarsity Fellowship. So in my undergrad years, I was deeply involved with InterVarsity, and then I went on staff. And so I had a lot of wonderful experiences with InterVarsity, and I was drawn to kind of the deep one-on-one discipling conversations with people. And I just found that I'm so curious about the process that people go through of healing and transformation and life change. And so, when I was teaching, speaking, meeting one-on-one, or even leading groups, I was always kind of oriented around that kind of work. And so eventually, many years went by, and I still work with InterVarsity a little bit now. Love that organization. But I realized I wanted to go deeper in understanding the inner working of human souls. And so that's where the counseling training and the spiritual direction training came to bear. But in my work and all of its facets, when I'm getting to kind of address how people can really grow and see life change and thrive in their calls and not give up on the things that God has called them to, that's like when I'm most passionate and alive and feel like I'm doing what God created me to do. So that was kind of my journey. But there are so many ways and spaces to be able to do that kind of work with people. You can do it through writing. You can do it through counseling, like I do here every day. You can do it through spiritual direction. You can do it through speaking and training. And so really that's where it all kind of came together for me.
Yeah, I love that. I know I mentioned this before we started recording, but I read your book, Restore My Soul, earlier this year, and honestly, it was one of my favorite books of 2025, and I read a lot. I connected with it so deeply. So I'd love to explore some of my favorite concepts with you, but before we do that, for listeners who haven't come across your book yet, how would you describe its essence or its purpose in your own words?
Yeah. I love the subtitle of my book, Restore My Soul. And then the subtitle is Reimagining Self-Care for a Sustainable Life. So I said before, I'm so passionate about empowering people to live well in the things that God has called them to and not give up. And this book is intended to be a resource and a workbook for people who feel the need to care for themselves so that they can stay in kingdom living for the long haul, so they can keep persisting in their call. So it's basically a compilation of all the things that I found myself talking to most of my therapy and spiritual direction clients about. So they would come, whatever they came to work on with me, whether it was, life problems or mood disorders or relationship issues or whatever, there would come a point in the session where we kind of pivot and start talking about, okay, how can you start feeling better tomorrow? And we would talk about all the things that are in this book. And we would create like a little, a personalized plan for each person to start doing things that would impact how they felt right away. And that's kind of what this book is about. Is it goes through the why these realms of self-care are so important, and then the how do you address them. And so there are these concrete skills and practices that you can start doing the next day throughout the book.
One of the things I really appreciated about the book is how practical it is. Yeah. And so I'm curious, when you think about the broader conversation around self-care, what gaps were you hoping to fill with Restore My Soul?
Well, I make a joke in the book about Barbie style self-care, just that it's pampering, that you do when you are completely, frayed and fried, and you stop your life and you do something that's usually, pretty expensive to do to pamper yourself, like a spa day. And then you're supposed to feel, so renewed by this. And I just thought, okay, like we can't all stop and do spa days, every time frayed and frazzled. And so what I became passionate about was finding ways to talk about, like, how do you integrate self-care practices in the hours and days of your life so that the weeks and the months feel better. So it doesn't have to be a big stop, gap thing to do when you are already so overtired that that you have no choice but to do it. Like, there's a great image that I came across when thinking about sheep and shepherds as a metaphor. And that's of a cast sheep. So a sheep, when it gets stuck on its back, when it falls down and rolls over onto its back, it really can't get back up by itself. And this really spoke to me of, that's how we're looking at self-care. It's like, yeah, when we are so depleted that we're stuck on our back and cannot get back up, the good shepherd is there to put us back on our feet and wants to. But I believe that the good shepherd, Jesus, doesn't want us to wind up stuck on our backs. Is there a way we can do things so that we don't become cast sheep in the first place? What does it look like to be going to the green meadows on a regular basis and being led to still waters, while you're not so depleted that you're on the brink, so that you're able to really, thrive and do the things that God has called you to.
So good. Well, I know that your book is structured around 4 key areas: thoughts, emotions, rhythms, and fulfillment. I'm wondering, why did you choose these particular categories, and why do you feel it's so important for people to tend to each of these areas as a part of meaningful self-care?
Well, they ended up being the top 4 just because they were the top 4 in my lived experience trying to help people, work on their mental health and spiritual well-being. Thoughts and the way we think impact how we feel more than anything. We are in a bit of a growth curve, I believe, but particularly where men are concerned, just a real kind of drought in terms of people being able to really access their emotions, name and identify them. So we have like a lot of avoiders and stuffers out there that are doing that unconsciously. And so that becomes important work. And then, of course, the rhythms of life is like, how do we tend ourselves during um, during fast seasons and slow seasons, during times when stressors are just abundant and really, really difficult, as well as times of ease. So I would suggest that we all need to know how to care well for ourselves when things in intensity ramps up, because that's inevitable about life. And then the fulfillment would come in where people would get to the point of real burnout and sort of quit everything and then come start working with me. And then we would figure out after some time, like, oh my gosh, you quit like some deeply life-giving, fulfilling things.
Right.
And now you have them, right? And now you feel worse. So to, at the end of the day, like all of these realms became like the things that with almost everyone, in some way, shape, or form, when talking about their overall well-being, we'd be touching on each of those realms.
Yeah, that's so good. I'd love to walk through each of these categories together because I found them really insightful. So let's start with that first central theme, managing your thoughts. How do you help people recognize patterns in their thinking that might be unhelpful or limiting?
Yeah. I mean, what I want all of us ultimately to be able to do is recognize the voice of the Good Shepherd and know what is definitely not the voice of the Good Shepherd. So in my thinking about sheep and shepherds, one thing I learned is that in agrarian times, shepherds would often shelter from a storm in a cave or something with other shepherds and their sheep, and so their flocks would get all mixed up, right? And then when the storm passed and they would come out of the cave, each shepherd would start calling, and then the flock would just immediately divide back because they're so attuned to their own shepherd's voice that they can distinguish it amongst all the calls. And that's what ultimately I want us to be able to do. And for some of us, and this is definitely true for me, there's sort of a backwards learning that is helpful to know what is very unlikely to be the way God would speak to you. And just to kind of categorize things loosely, I think that the ways that God is unlikely to speak to any of us is through worry, through rumination, and through despair. And these categories of thinking, I think all of us can relate to in some way, shape, or form. Worry tends to look backwards. It sort of fill in the blank. What if blank happens? Enter catastrophe in the blank. What if the horrible thing happens? And you think and think and think about it, and it's non-productive and circular. And worrying a lot tends to raise anxiety levels. And then rumination tends to look backwards and points us into, why did I do that? How could I have done that? What would you think of me? And rumination tends to be kind of circular and non-productive and tends to raise levels of depression. Now, despairing is kind of I'll always be this way. There's no point. All is lost. Everything is hopeless. And it tends to look backwards and forwards and tends to raise both depression and anxiety levels. So, and that's my favorite one. I like to despair. And so sometimes like working on recognizing when we think like that can help us know, okay, this is my own chatter that's impacting my mood. What does it look like for me to listen to the voice of the Good Shepherd? And one of my very favorite tools to do this is called the Ministry of the Orange and Purple Pen.
Yeah, I love that one.
Yes. And this is simply an exercise where you take an orange pen, and one of my old mentors taught me this, and he said he picked orange because it's the color of the jumpsuits of the imprisoned, or maybe it's the color of the hazard signs. But it's basically a color, this is not the voice of the Good Shepherd color that we've chosen. No offense to those orange loving people out there. But to take the orange pen and then just take 2 minutes, set a timer, and then write in orange your thoughts when they're at their worst. And usually when I lead people in this, it's pretty easy for us to go like, yeah, I know what it's like in there. And to write out those words in orange, right? Now, writing them has the impact for us and helping us become more conscious and aware of them. And then writing them in orange sort of labels them or earmarks them as these are the thoughts that happen when I'm at my worst. And so it raises our awareness. It helps us know our own inner chatter better. And then we have a chance of recognizing it later. Now, the purple pen part of the exercise, you set the timer again for a couple of minutes, and you take a purple pen. And in this part of the exercise, you really seek to listen to the voice of the Good Shepherd. And here's where we start. It will not be worry thoughts. It will not be ruminative thoughts. It will not be despairing thoughts, right? It may be challenging, maybe kind of intense, but the voice of the Good Shepherd has the quality of the scriptures, has the quality of encouragement and faith and hope and love. And so sometimes when I'm doing this exercise, I really feel like I can sense that kind of, sentences come to mind that I feel like, I think that this is what God's saying to me, and I'll write that in purple. But that's not always the way it is. Sometimes I feel a little blocked or stuck in that. And that's where I go to the scriptures, because I know we always have the Good Shepherd voice because we have the scriptures. And I might open to Psalm 23 or Psalm 145 or some of my favorites and just read through them slowly and invite the Holy Spirit to help me notice which phrases stand out today. And then I read those in purple, right? And so that exercise over the years has really helped me to distinguish the difference in what's coming at me in my thoughts. I had this same friend who taught me this skill said the profound truth that the enemy does not want us to be well. And the enemy does not want us to be mentally well. So when we spend 1, 2, 7, 10 hours a day worrying or ruminating or despairing, that's going to take us out of commission, And so being able to disrupt that and then invite the voice of the Good Shepherd is so relieving and so releasing from some of the traps that we fall into mentally.
Yeah, that's so good. Let's move to the next area, which is emotions. I love this category because I think so often we learn to either numb or push aside our emotions instead of really honoring what they're trying to tell us. And you talk about the importance of acknowledging and sitting with what we feel and creating space for our emotions rather than suppressing them. So can you share why you believe that practice is so important for our emotional and spiritual health?
Yeah. Well, like I said before, people are avoiding and stuffing emotions right and left. What I like to tell people is that the way we are created by God, it takes us about 45 to 90 seconds to experience an emotion from beginning to end. So I love telling people this because so many people are afraid if they let themselves feel something that they're going to have to call out of work, or go hide in their bedroom for a week if they open up these emotions. And I'm like, well, actually, it should take about a minute for you to experience an emotion to the fullest if you aren't trying to stop it or shove it or repress it. And so just being able to, what I say is like name the emotion. And sometimes people, like I'll send people home with an emotions chart, to be able to kind of look at it and say, well, what is this emotion I'm feeling? And then allow it in Jesus' presence. Jesus, here I am feeling disappointment or feeling envy or feeling anger or whatever it is. Here I am. To allow that it's there in Jesus' presence and then just to experience it. Let yourself feel it. You might get kind of rattly and you might feel tears come. If you're angry, you might feel your body tense. but just to give it a moment. And this is, such an important skill for people to bring into their kind of day-to-day and hour-to-hour self-care, because otherwise those emotions work on us in such a profound way. Like, it only takes a minute to experience an emotion, but it can take hours and untold amounts of energy to avoid it.
Yeah. I'm thinking of some of my clients who often share with me that when they try to bring an emotion to Jesus, their instinctive response is, I can't feel that way with him. And this has certainly been a part of my story as well. There's often this sense that certain emotions aren't acceptable or maybe appropriate in his presence. What would you say to someone who struggles to believe that all of their emotions are safe to bring before God?
Well, I mean, it's very, very common. And I'm right there with you and feeling like it's really vulnerable for me to admit that I experience some of the unpleasanter emotions. But I would say that the emotions themselves are morally neutral. That we see in the scriptures that emotions are, validated and experienced. Jesus experienced anger. Jesus experienced sadness. Um, you know, God experiences jealousy. There are just many ways we can look and see. It seems like a lot of these emotions are really allowed, and it's really how we act on them or how we might nurture them in our minds and our thoughts that becomes then, problematic, or what I would call potentially sinful. The experience of the emotion itself in Jesus' presence is an important part of our authentic connection to Jesus, and a spiritual practice of authenticity that most of us deeply need and benefit from. So even just the really simple journaling prompt, Dear Jesus, I feel blank because blank, and then just writing it. It's like another way of saying, here I am. This is me. And, would you help me with this? I don't want to stay in this state of abject rage. I don't want to live driven by envy towards this person or this situation, and to talk to Jesus about it. So I say, I hope that this conversation might help some people decide, yeah, it can be okay to bring all of your emotions into your relationship with Jesus and be deeply and more fully known.
Well, the last two categories in your book are ones that I've been sitting with a lot recently, and they are rhythms and fulfillment. And these two categories offer such a thoughtful way of looking at our days and weeks more intentionally. So could you share some concrete examples of daily or weekly practices that help you maintain that sense of balance and rest you're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to say about this category, but I'll just start with like a metaphor that came to me that was so helpful to me. And it came to me when I was having dinner with my friend who had made tortilla soup. And I had the first bite of soup and I was like, oh, this has got some kick, okay. Then I had a couple more bites and I was like, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to eat this soup. It's so spicy for me. And then my friend who had cooked the soup said, oh, something is wrong. This is soup way, way, way too spicy. And she looked at the recipe and sure enough, she had put in a tablespoon of cayenne instead of a teaspoon of cayenne, which for some people makes a rather lovely soup. But for us, it was too spicy for our palates. Now, people who cook know you don't necessarily have to throw out that soup to make it better, right? It's got too much cayenne. But if you add yogurt or brown sugar or potatoes, or you can add things to the soup that will help the soup become palatable again. And this was the image that kind of was the aha for me is, oh my goodness, every day it's like we're cooking a vat of soup in our bodies. If you think of our bodies as a vat of soup that we're hoping is palatable all day long, and we have basically two sets of ingredients to put in. We have stress hormone we can put in, and we have happy hormone we can put in. Well, if your life has got too much stress hormone, you might be waking up every morning with basically like soup stock that's got too much spice to start, So what are you going to do? And, you can't always eliminate all the stressors from your life. If your stressors are your teenage children or your really difficult work situation or your parents or the economy or whatever's going on in the world. So you might have stressors that you can't just take out of your life. So you've got a lot of stress hormone in that soup, but you can add things from the other side, the happy hormone, into the soup to make that soup palatable. And that's where I really love crafting a plan with people about like, what's your hormone soup plan that might involve just like 3 interventions a day where you're intentional about bringing happy hormone into into the rhythms of your day. And so in the book, I talk about better mornings, better bedtimes, and better breaks. And sometimes just instituting better breaks in your day can be take 10 minutes or less a day to do, or even 5 minutes or less a day to do, but can make a real big difference in the way you feel. So, I mean, usually when I talk to my clients, and you can probably relate to this, and we can all relate ourselves, is when I'm like, do you take a break in your day? And if people say yes, they often say, and I pick up my phone, right? And I start scrolling social media or like headlines, it's a kind of break, but it's probably going to put stress hormone into your body instead of happy hormone, unless you are very austere about what you have notifying you on your phone. And so I'll say, what if at least once or twice a day you don't do that, and instead you go stand at the window and look at the trees blowing outside, or if you read a bit of scripture or listen to an encouraging song. I love to assign to families having like a family dance party every evening before bedtime or something, right? So, but these things that very few of us will do unless we're intentional. But once you intentionally do them, you feel the benefit. So after listening to a really encouraging song or having a family dance party, I mean, you feel physically different in your body having done it. And so I just say to people, oh my goodness, as far as daily rhythms go, do not begrudge the small interventions. They make a huge difference. You do not need a spa day. You don't need a 2-week. Well, you might need a 2-week vacation eventually, but you don't have to have the vacation to feel any better than you do. You can start doing things now that can help you feel better. So I have, so many ideas about this. And so I have a resource I can give your listeners.
Yeah, I'll link it in the show notes.
But yeah, hormonesoupresource.com. It's 50 self-care ideas that take 5 minutes or less. And I'm just passionate about that. So that's one thing about rhythms, but there's so much to say about rhythms. Yeah. And then the last one, the fulfillment, I feel like is kind of the sleeper, it's the one that nobody talks about. I have come to believe that for people who are trying to be intentional about self-care for the long haul, that you need to be doing something fulfilling in most of your days to have ultimate self-care happening. And so now this can be a very small thing. Like, I can feel really fulfilled by texting a thoughtful encouragement to someone who I know is suffering, right? So it's a fulfilling act. It took me 3 minutes to think of. I get double fulfillment when I hear back from that person that they're grateful. And that's like a thing I value doing. It fulfills me, but I've got to be pretty intentional to make it happen. I had the story that I wrote about in the book that helped me kind of crystallize my thinking about this is I had gotten a friend had admired this fuzzy blanket I had in my house, and so I went and got her one like it and was going to bring it to her to surprise her. And I hope some of you can relate to this, but it had been like 7 weeks since I got this blanket, and I still had not delivered it to her. It's like sitting next to my door, just like accusing me of like, what is wrong with your life that you've not brought this to this friend, And it was a busy season, and so one day finally I'm like, enough, I am taking this to her. So I brought it, left it at her doorstep. She wasn't home, but then that evening she sent me a selfie of herself with her son cuddled up in this blanket, and she was just like, I feel so loved. And then I'm like, yes, see, fulfillment, do fulfilling things. So, for some of us, much of our workday is fulfilling, and I hope that, for most of us. But for some people, maybe it varies. You might have to be intentional to make sure that most days have something fulfilling to you in them. But it doesn't have to be so incredibly difficult. It doesn't have to be something that takes you half the day. But but most of us have to be intentional about it. We don't just automatically do it. And like I said before, in so many cases, far too many cases, when I feel like people are really in a state of burnout and they really need to pare back in their activities, and then they quit everything, and then they quit some of those fulfilling things. That's where I'm like, oh yeah, if you are feeling like you're teetering near the brink of burnout, I would agree. You probably need to make some big adjustments if that's the case. But be careful that you don't end up sort of taking out the things that give you the most life.
Yeah, so good. Oh, I wish we could keep going. But as we begin to wrap up, I'm thinking of listeners who are really connecting with your words right now. And if they could just take one thing from your work to help restore their hearts and minds, what would it be?
Today, right now, make a plan to take 3 better breaks in your day. Meaning a break that's not on your phone, but that really gives you a sense of soothing or ease, or delight or joy. It doesn't have to take that long, and it can make a big difference in how you feel. And the truth behind that is that I believe that Jesus wants you to have a rich and satisfying life. And even through seasons of struggle, I believe that that's Jesus' desire. And that I think that there are some of you listening to this right now who are thinking, wow, like life following Jesus or pursuing my call is so difficult. I don't know how long I'm going to make it. And to you, I want to say, try adopting some of these things, because I know that God does not want you to burn out living out the things He's called you to. That's not God. Jesus don't want you to burn out. There, that's my truth, and that's what I want people to take. Jesus does not want you to burn out, and there are a lot of things that you can be doing that are not too hard to help with that and help a great deal.
So good. I love how you point out in your book that Jesus lived such a full and joyful life. He laughed and he played and he connected so deeply with others. And it's such a beautiful reminder of what wholeness can look like.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Janice. I am so grateful for you and for your time today.
Taylor, thank you for having me. And I'm just all about it. Faith and feelings. Do feelings well, people. Come on.
Wasn't that so practical and helpful? I want to close with one of my favorite quotes from Janice that I think really sums up our conversation. She writes, "We tend to lose chances at fulfillment in the small choices we make, and they build up, wearing us down and making us wonder if the life we've chosen is really the life we want." Few of us stop to think about how our everyday choices shape our overall fulfillment. Most of the time, we only look at the big picture. In my copy of her book, that quote is underlined and highlighted and starred and circled because it's true. Our lives are shaped in the small moments, in the way we pause or breathe, or choose kindness towards ourselves and others. It's those daily choices that slowly form the life we long for. I've linked Janice's book, Restore My Soul, along with her website in the show notes. And if you'd like to hear more of my reflections on today's episode, you can subscribe to my Substack. That's linked there too. I'd love to have you join this community. I'm so grateful that you listened to today's episode. Thank you for spending time with me. I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on Instagram at TaylorJoy or through my website, taylorjoymurray.co. Also, if you enjoyed this conversation, it would mean so much to me if you took a minute to subscribe and review the podcast. This is an easy way to partner with me and is invaluable in reaching new listeners. Until next week.